Welcome or welcome back. This is Paris Wild Knitting. I'm Jennifer, and this is a knitting podcast all about knitting, yarny adventures, and travel. Thank you very much for joining me today. As always, thrilled that you're here and we get to sit down, chat, knit, and today it's all about cables. So thank you for being here. Get comfy, get cozy. Today is everything I knit cable edition. This is actually a part 2 of a part 3 series that I'm putting together all about cables to get us super ready into a deep fall, perhaps winter, and cozy knits. So if you're a beginner, if you're very experienced in cables, I hope you enjoy today because literally I have a sea of knitted cables beside me and I can't wait to share about them. So let's dive in. My very first object that I'm going to be sharing about is my finished object. This is my most recent cast off, and man, does she have a story. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to talk about the pattern, the mods, of course, the yarn, and just sprinkle in the stories because every stitch is so incredibly meaningful in this sweater. So, Guernsey Genser. Guernsey Genser is a design by Sandnes Garn. It's found in this physical knitting book, Stuff for Women, 2202 edition. And it is an overall, quote, cable, and I'm careful because I'm quoting the cables, knit sweater, veering motifs, and no, it's technically not all cables. There's texturing going on. When this sweater became, I feel, popular on Instagram with other podcasters as well, it did not resonate with me in the beginning. I felt like it was very much too busy for what I normally enjoy wearing. And so I knit many other patterns in the book and only recently did this one call out. I've done modifications that have worked, I feel, quite well for me. I'm really happy with the overall aesthetic. I'm happy with the fit, and it did involve a lot of modifications. All right, so basically, I will try to be as concise as I can, also respecting the pattern design because it is a paid for pattern, not available digitally. So let's go. The first thing is I got gauge of the sweater with the yarn that I'm going to tell you all about in a moment. It is the Handvaerksgarn by, and gosh, it's always a mouthful, HjelholtsUldspinderi. This is in the colorway 23 or Sand, and she has a story. If you haven't been here, I'll inform you. So I did match gauge with this yarn on US 6 needles. It was great. However, when I cast on, because you cast on at the back, and the 1x1 moss stitching, it was just ginormous. And one piece of feedback or critique or maybe even comment that other knitters have shared about this exact pattern or sweater is that it is huge. If you also have been here, you know I am not a huge person. And so oftentimes I'm not only having to go down needle size by 1 or 2 needle sizes to get gauge or to have a sweater fit better. However, I also have to often go not only to the smaller size of the pattern, but I have to do a whole recalculation in order for the sweater to fit me a little better. Otherwise, I completely can swim in a garment. So, right, when I cast on and knit up a good chunk of the back, which is just like a panel, it's a rectangle that you're knitting essentially in the moss stitch, it was massive. I have in my notes, massive when I completed the moss stitch panel. I had to rip it all out and figure out what I was going to do. I cast this on July 24th, so this was a longer knit for me, but again, this is going to lead into the story that I will share with you. And I had to decide, this is something that I really wanted to knit with the yarn or not. So what I did is I really molded over, and while on vacation in Nova Scotia this summer, I decided I was going to knit this. It's exactly where my heart was with this yarn. I thought the pairing was fabulous for this sweater with all the great texture and cable-y bits. And so I did a massive recalculation. I essentially took out 4 inches from the smallest size on either side of the sweater. So I should say both sides of the sweater. So it's reduced by 8 inches from the smallest size. What I did to do some of that, and I'm careful again with how I'm sharing, essentially it's easy to look at if we look at the cross cabling that's done. And so I eliminated 2 whole sections of that motif to reduce the width of the sweater. The cables, or I should say the charts, were nothing to modify. I didn't have to modify actually at all the cable work charts. It was everything else. So it was amount of stitches I cast on. It was, I had to, and I won't show because again, it's written pattern. I had actually a pencil with me at all times, and I would have to recalculate how many stitches for the next thing I was going to do. So if it was like, you know, I don't know, picking up at shoulders, I would have to do a ratio or percentage of how many stitches I should pick up. It got a little hot and heavy for a bit because I was doing calculations for everything. Once I started getting the hang of it, it was much smoother sailing. I think the most busy time obviously was the front section, because you pick up at the shoulders and you knit around, you pick up at this shoulder, you knit around. And so that created a little bit of math conundrums. But we got there. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't impossible. It just took a little more brain power than normal, and definitely mine's on knit, especially modifying. Yes, and one of the other mods I did along with size, there's a few, is the last motif of the sweater. I just did a 1x1 ribbing, or sorry, goodness, a 1x1 moss stitch to mimic up in the shoulder section. In the original design, there's almost a wheat cable motif that is done. It's really beautiful, but for what I was wanting, again, the busyness of it seemed a little too much for what I was after. So I felt like this really allowed the sweater to melt those motifs together. And I feel like it worked really well. I have seen on Ravelry, I think one other person do it, maybe 2, I can't remember. And that was great inspiration. I did a 2x1, what's it called? Ribbing. I cannot remember. I think it was a 2x2 ribbing. Again, I think just because I'm a looser ribber in general, that's one of the mods I did. And that is not where we ended, because I was looking for a boxy fit, not a crazy, like massive oversized, I'm gonna swim in this sweater fit. It meant other modifications and sweater surgery. So I had, in the pattern, I followed where to bring the pattern in together, like to, how can I say it? To knit the front and back together to start knitting in the round, because you're basically flat and flat if you've knit a sweater like this before, and then you connect the panels, the front and back panel, and then knit in the round. And that is what I did. I didn't think of modifying at that point to join in sooner. So in a bit of a panic, I thought, okay, I'm not gonna rip all of the body out. So what I ended up doing is I ended up stitching. I think it's called a mattress stitch, between the front and back panel for the additional fabric that wasn't knit together. This would have been, if I didn't make the mod, this would have been like down here, I can't see it, I hope you can, the beginning of the armhole, which would have meant the arm itself would be ginormous, which I have seen ginormous arms on this sweater with other knitters before. Again, not what I was after. I used the inspiration from sweater number, I think it was 23, by My Favorite Things Knitwear, where it's a boxy fit, oversized fit even, excuse me, and the sleeves are much less ease than the sweater, so it balances it out, so you have a really big body and a more fitted sleeve. So that's what I went for. So we stitched it up, not really knowing how it was gonna do, but I think, I mean, it's not perfect, but I think it's really doable. The job that I did, I'm proud of, but also it hides under the underarm, so it's really not a massive deal breaker for me if it didn't work out perfectly, but it actually worked out better than I expected. And the other thing is that before I blocked it, obviously it kind of like, here was the body, and then where I had stitched up the mattress stitching, of course it pulled in of that fabric slightly. So I just was really mindful when I blocked to like make it all like straight, like 180 degrees kind of thing. And of course, because you're doing a cable here, the cables actually naturally tend to cinch in the fabric. So I was very mindful when I was blocking to just pull that part out a little more aggressively than the moss stitching. Another mod I did was the sleeve itself, of course, because we are looking at a much thinner, less ease sleeve. This I did, I'm just looking, okay, so this I also did 2 less motifs around the sleeve. So yeah, you know, this was actually way easier to modify, of course, than the body, because you're not doing all kinds of additional like process like you are at the front. The not complication, but I think additional piece of thought was, of course, the decreases as you go through the arm. So I did a decrease. I actually followed my own knit tuition and did decreases. I light bulb stitch markered on my first sleeve and I mimicked on the second. So I decreased in anything that was the breaks of the purl and knit columns, or I should say rows. And then I also continued to do some decreases in the double moss stitching. I think it worked really well. The sleeves are still big and really long. I was debating, do I even block this or do I rip some of the sleeve out to allow it to be shorter? But I thought, you know what? I really love the look of a longer sleeve under my wool coats, where it has my knit sleeve from my sweater and then my wool coat starts. So I thought that would be great. And I do know that when I'm like in the kitchen or doing something with water, I can just tuck in my cuffs and allows all my cuff to like come up and not be as crazy long. I did not follow, there's so many things, the ribbing design as well, in that I shouldn't have, if I followed the design, the ribbing would be flush with the pattern of, or I should say the width of the sleeve. I wanted it cinched in a little bit more, so I reduced a little more heavily around, right? I did a little knit row before I did my ribbing. My gosh, okay. I think in general, those are the mods without going into even further detail. Let's talk about the yarn. The yarn is yarn that I purchased from Garntopia. This is a wonderful yarn shop in Oslo, Norway. I was there with the love of my life in the summer, right before we were in Nova Scotia, and fell in love with Norway, loved Oslo. Garntopia was such a beautiful yarn shop. I had bought, my gosh, now I forget, five skeins of the HjelholtsUldspinderi Handvaerksgarn, thinking that that would be normally enough for a sweater that I would knit. Each skein is 200 meters. You're looking at 100 grams. I have a little ball band like right here, so it's kind of cheating. It is a really interesting mix of yarn, or I should say of wool. It's a cross between a Gotland wool and Merino. It is a Danish yarn, but I did buy it, like I said, in Norway. And I just fell in love with this rustic but soft. It's, you know, I say soft, it's got a halo for sure that I think it makes it appear as soft, but it's almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's super cozy warm, but it does have a prickle factor. And I feel, coming from me, where I wear Icelandic wool and Canadian rustics, like almost next to skin depending, this is a really unique yarn base to work with. I loved working with it. I do have to say though, wearing it, I think I will always have a shirt on underneath. Like I have a tight t-shirt on today underneath, and I'm happy. I did do a folded down neckband, which I'm glad about, because I think if it was a high neckband, my neck's quite sensitive. I don't know if I would enjoy it that much because it would be itchy. So this sweater, because I didn't have at the time of purchasing the yarn a pattern idea for the pairing of the yarn, only when I came home I realized this is what I wanted to do. I was a skein short. I had knit the body. I mean, it's a big body. You've seen the video of me in it. And I had one skein left and like a half to do 2 sleeves. And I thought that's not gonna fly. So then I was thinking, do I do a short sleeve? Do I, you know, do a 1/4, 3/4 length sleeve? And I was just thinking like, no. If you've been here for previous episodes, you'll know that I really wanted to maintain the vision of the long sleeve. So I reached out to our gorgeous knitting community to see what some options were, because shipping was, if I was purchasing 1 skein of yarn from Garntopia, in my opinion, an astronomical price for delivery. The yarn itself is like 22, maybe 23 Canadian dollars, so still not inexpensive, but the shipping was like 3 times as much. It was going to be like 77 Canadian dollars to have the yarn shipped and for the cost of the yarn. I couldn't justify that. Again, viewers had said, like, if you purchase a sweater quantity, it's worth it. And absolutely, I had just bought like tons of yarn on my last recent trips, and I thought, no, like I can't do this. So reaching out to the community and asking, you know, do we have any other methods of a Canadian knitter obtaining this gorgeous yarn that's Danish, with potentially, this was like even a higher level that I never expected in the lot number of this colorway, because I couldn't get this in North America. I tried the US online, I tried Canada online, it was not happening. There were many gorgeous knitters that reached out. One in particular I did work with to get the skein of yarn here from Garntopia in the exact same lot number. That was Marielle from Oslo. She has graciously went to Garntopia, purchased the yarn, sent it over to Canada, and I have to say it was much less expensive than if I had gone it alone. So thank you very much to her. I mean, she did this on her free time and her own free will, and I think it's just a reminder of how lovely our community is. So thank you again to her, because this sleeve would not have happened without her generosity and her spending the time and being thoughtful to go purchase the yarn, ship it across essentially the world, and come to me. So thank you very much to Marielle. And this is why the sweater, not only did I cast on in Nova Scotia, so it has all this beautiful, you know, memories of sitting by the ocean and knitting. The yarn, of course, from my time in Norway, and then the connection now with a knitter friend from Oslo as well, Marielle. So thank you. And thank you to everyone that reached out, of course, to offer some kind of option to have the yarn be sent to Toronto. My heart. Okay, so that is the cable-y bit of the Guernsey Genser. I do want to just conclude, my gosh, I feel like this is already 5 hours, that the true and only cables is actually this one motif of the cross cabling. Everything else is moss stitch or knits and purls. Do I recommend it or something like this as a first cable pattern? If you do know mods, very doable. I think breaking up the cables allows it to be much more accessible and manageable, if you will. I think even taking this idea where you're knitting a thing, either a garment or accessory, in sections that break up the cables with other stitches, very doable. This cable design or motif was very approachable. It was not crazy. You're gonna see some crazy stuff soon. This was very doable. So that's a Guernsey Genser in Handvaerksgarn yarn. Just, okay, incredible. So as we prance on, what I'm going to show now are finished objects that I've had in my closet for a little bit of time or a lot, that include cables. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my garments and then go into accessories, and that's what we'll do. The objective of this for me is to share and get you inspired to knit cables, either get you back on the train if you haven't knit cables for a minute, get you really excited to knit cables for the cooler weather that you might be experiencing soon, or maybe now, or if you haven't knit cables, to allow yourself to feel like you can do it. I had a beautiful viewer that commented on the last cable part 1 video of the knitting inspiration. It's all my pattern roundup for cables, and said that she would like to become a fearless cable knitter this year. And I thought, yes, like we should all go into knitting with fearlessness. I mean, what's the worst that can happen is that you take your time and you have to rip back. I mean, I think of all the things in the world that we do every day that are way, way harder and have so much more impact. Let's be fearless in our knitting. So yes. Okay, we're gonna get in. My very first sweater that I'm gonna share, and I'm working backwards in chronological order. So these are my most recent cast-offs to my oldest cast-offs, and one which you have never seen on the channel, and there's a good reason for it. Okay, first one is this. I consider this such a gem. This is the Moby sweater by Petite Knit. I will clarify, this is the junior version by Petite Knit, the Moby Junior. This is an overall cable work sweater, and this one, I'm just getting my computer up so I don't miss a beat. This sweater truly is actual cables everywhere, unlike the Guernsey Genser. We have variety of cables. Cables are literally everywhere on the sweater. It is a minds-on sweater. I knit this, I'll talk about the yarn very quickly, but then I'll get into the pattern. This is knit in, oh my gosh, I don't want to get it wrong, Peace Fleece in Antarctic White. I purchased this when I was down in the States last summer, fall, and fell in love with this yarn. It's a mesh of sheepy wool, I can't remember the exact breed, but also has a content of mohair. So it's got some real great halo-y bits. It's a very heavy yarn, and it's a very heavy sweater because of course you have cables, so you actually have more fabric, I should say almost more yarn per like square inch than you would, I think, with any other knit. I would even argue color work. This is just tons of yarn. It gobbles it up. There are very interesting motifs. We have almost like a cross hatching cable that's happening again here, somewhat like this, but again, quite different. So I'm not even going to compare. You have sorry, I keep moving it, a multiple stitch repeat here of, I think it's like a 6x6 cable. This section, this little like border section is knits and purls going down with, I won't give away the stitch because it's a specific stitch on the side to allow it to get pushed out to become really 3D. And then moss stitching on the sides. It's just, my gosh, it's just cables. The sleeves are no different. You've got that 6, I think it's a 6, gosh, maybe it's a 6x6, it's been a while, pattern cable going down the arms, again with that border stitching, I'm calling it. And then it's the moss stitching. This moss is a double knit moss stitch. So it's like 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. And she's a lot. Similar-ish construction of the Guernsey Genser. You're casting on at the back neckline. This one's unique because you've got like a trapezoid almost that's being knit up. This one was just literally like a rectangle in the back. And this is very minds on. I found getting, of course, because when you're casting on anything, or I'll be specific with this pattern, you are, all the motifs are fresh. So there's no muscle memory for any of the cable repeats, the pattern motifs. You're actually knitting flat in the beginning. So you're doing knits, you're going backwards and you're purling. There's a lot going on. You're increasing stitches. It's very minds on. I would never recommend this for an absolute beginner unless you are brave and completely fearless. But I would say attention, like buyer beware. Yeah, this was very interesting. I do have to say, once I got the hang of the pattern repeats and the cable stitches, I almost at one point I think had memorized, when I was in the round, the motif. There was points, of course, because I am usually doing something as I'm knitting, even with this kind of thing. I had printed off the pattern. I am someone that never prints a pattern. There were so many charts, cable charts, that I had to track, and sometimes you're working off of multiple charts for one like section. I had to have a physical copy, and I'll share in my part 3 all about cables episode that will be coming up, of how I feel like perhaps for me and perhaps for you, if you're someone that is willing to give different techniques a try, something that I felt worked well. I don't think anything I did was rocket science, but it did definitely take trial and error to figure things out, but we got there. I did the folded neckline to have it as a double knit band, neck band. And I didn't even talk about my bind offs for that, but that's okay. And I did an in pattern bind off, which is very normal for me. I don't like the knitted, or sorry, it's the sewn bind offs, like Italian bind offs are not my thing. And I find for me, this actually has a really nice clean finish. I like that it's flat. It's very pleasing to the eye. And so this is what I do. I did not do modifications on this because it would have been way too scary, and maybe I was being a fearful cable knitter, but I felt like that wasn't where I wanted to go with this. This pattern, I chose the junior option because of sizing. So full disclosure, I have not remeasured this actually since I blocked the sweater, which would be interesting because each section would be different. The gauge that they, I should say introduce a pattern with that you're supposed to get is of the moss stitching. So I could easily take a little measurement and see, but this was bigger. So I went with the, gosh, it was the second largest size of the junior. And I know that if I had gone with the adult size, I just got super hot, with the adult size of the Moby sweater, it would have been massive for me. So yes, but do know that this yarn was not the intended yarn, and the gauge must be bigger. It has to be. I know my swatch was bigger, so I'm sure the finished object is too. And because it's so heavy in wearing it, super cozy, the gravity pulls on it as well, which is why the sleeves are ginormous in the best of ways. I do get a lot of wear out of it. I brought this actually to Nova Scotia with me and did wear it in the summer evenings there. So yeah, lovely, lovely sweater. Definitely one I would consider for an experienced cable knitter. It was, I feel at times, even a little out of my comfort zone, but it's kind of nice to challenge ourselves sometimes. So that's the Moby sweater by Petite Knit. I don't know if I said that, in Peace Fleece. Yes, I don't think I missed anything there, so we are good. Yes, 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 lovely. All right, next up is this sweater. I did include this because it does have cables, even though it may not look it to us as a knitting community, but these are indeed cables. This is a field sweater by Camilla Vad. This is a gorgeous sweater that came out, I want to say last year, 2 years ago, my goodness, in the fall. And I knit this knowing exactly that this yarn would be perfect and pair with the pattern, and it did, and I feel like it sings. The yarn that I chose for this is Shear in Buttermilk. This is by Harrisville Designs. I actually bought it at the mill, or I should say the shop at Harrisville Designs in New Hampshire during one of our big road trips that we did last year while I was on sabbatical. It's a very light, very airy, should I say, yarn. It's just a stunner. It's rustic but crazy soft, and it was just a delight to work up. Super elastic, like high stretch. It was a delight to work with. I would definitely, if I could get my hands on this yarn easily again and needed more yarn, I would definitely buy this again. The modifications I did, I think, gosh, was just the neckline. I brought in the neckline more than the recommended pattern. So I cast on less stitches at the neckline with the intention that I would actually bring down the neckline to make a double like knit button band, but I kind of like it like this, so I've left it. I did a cast off of, this was a purl over purl cast off when I was super into that. And yeah, she's great. I have, here's some naughty knitting secrets. The way that this fabric turned out for me was very loose gauge. Like I should say like the airiness and loftiness was a little too much. So in the last time when I blocked this, or I should say washed this sweater, with the like lingerie bag that I usually like squeeze the sweater and then I put it in the spinner of the laundry machine, I put it in the dryer. You're probably thinking like, oh my gosh, Jennifer, that's crazy. It was a little crazy. I had my eye on it a lot. I checked it every like 5 seconds. And I have to say, I really enjoyed what it did. The fabric became cushier. It blew out the yarn more, so it filled in the spaces of the holes, and actually liked the fit more because I find like it was a little too floaty before. There we are. The design in general, and I have talked about this of course, but just briefly, is a super minds on knit. It is every row that you're knitting, these beautiful little grains is different. Every row is different. I classified this into the cabling FOs because you are knitting sometimes 3 stitches together, sometimes 5 stitches together, which can seem like a lot, but in this yarn, it was like easy as pie because of, again, the elasticity of the yarn. If this sweater was going to be knit again by myself, I would say it has to be with a yarn that is highly elastic, where you can stretch it quite a bit and it has that ability to flex with you as you're, you know, knitting up that many stitches in one go. I would highly suggest a yarn that is really, what's the word, like tight and doesn't have that give would not be a suitable yarn for this exact project. It's a stunner. I would definitely knit it again. And yeah, it's beautiful. That is the filled sweater by Camilla Vad. In regards to the Moby, would I knit this again? I think maybe one day if I was completely bored and didn't have 1,000 other sweaters to knit, but I'm in no rush to, and I would not knit this Guernsey Genser again with the modifications I did at this point. I say that now, I feel having one of these in my wardrobe I'm thrilled with. I don't think I need more. Although, okay, as I'm saying it, maybe a very dark knit, because I'm looking at a dark knit right beside me and I love it. Moving on to the next object is another sweater. This is the Snowy Forest sweater by Midori Hirose. This is technically what I was sharing, the first cable work sweater that I ever knit. It is a beautiful design that is found in Line magazine. This is the issue Winter 2020. As a physical copy, but as mentioned in the last episode, you can get this pattern online now. It's sold as an individual pay-for pattern, and it's a wonderful design. I'm just gonna bring it a little closer. Hopefully you saw a bit of that motif as well on the B-roll that I shot of me wearing it. I'm looking at it, I just adore it. I also knit this the majority of time in Nova Scotia as well. This is 2 strands held double of Plötulopi by Istex, a very rustic unspun yarn, Icelandic. And I chose this really dark colorway. The story of this yarn is that I received multiple plates, I can't remember how many now, from a girlfriend of mine that did not like the rustic itchiness of this yarn. So she gifted me a chunk of it, and this is where this inspiration came from. I really desired a simple, approachable cable sweater. And I thought in this dark colorway it was really unique. I feel often, as you've seen, the items that we knit in cables, and rightfully so, are in light colors because it really allows for those cables to pop. The color and with the shadows of the light allow for the texture to really be visual. As well with really round yarns. When it has a bit of halo, the cables can be more muted. So this is actually twofold of what people don't often do with cabling. Is 1, it's really dark yarn. 2, it's unspun, and there is quite a bit of halo with the guard hairs. I love it. I feel I like the cables to be there. I know they're there. It offers a lot of warmth, but interest as well. It kind of fools the eye in thinking like, what is there? So I find even for myself, I'm intrigued, and when I'm looking in the mirror, I'm trying to decipher more the details that are there. When I'm in full sun or highlight, of course, I feel they do shine brightly. And I love that I chose this. The colorway is Black Heather, and I feel like it couldn't have been a better choice. There were some mods I did. I added German short rows right after the neckline. Another thing I did, I cast on at the neckline without the ribbing. So this was just cast on because the original design was very, like, what can I say? Almost like boat neck, like very wide. And I didn't want that. I wanted it more cinched in. I like more of a cinched in neckline. So that's what we did. So we had knit this up smaller. With that, I also took out, and I'd have to look, at least 1 repeat of the big, it's like, I just read this last week, Midori Hirose's write-up about this pattern. This to me is almost like a horseshoe kind of thing. I forget what it was like frost rhymes. I think these are the frost rhymes, the little cables. There's only 2 different motifs in the whole sweater. Anyway, I took out one of those for sure, which means there's already quite a bit of reduction of body. And I remember when I had knit up the body, which is in stockinette stitch because the cables are only knit for the yoke, I did not cast on additional stitches onto the arm, which is why the arms are much more fitted. I just reduced all the additional increases essentially after the cable yoke. Again, I'm careful with how I'm sharing because it is a paper pattern. So quite a bit smaller than the smallest size even listed on the pattern. I love this sweater, very approachable for a new to cables knitter. This was featured in my beginner cable knit patterns from last week, and do recommend it. It's really approachable, it's lovely, and I feel like it's big bang for your buck. You're getting a beautiful cable yoke and then chilling out as you go for the stockinette. My reco is that if you are newer to cables or want to make your life super easy by creating this beautiful sweater, use spun or plied yarn instead of the unspun. And if you want to make it super easy, of course, one strand. So you don't have to manage two strands as you're cabling, because as we do dip into those stitches that are already super tight because they're out of order on your cable, on your needle or your cable needle, having one strand is easier to count and manage than multiple strands. For example, two strands held together. That's just my 2 cents. So that is the Snowy Forest by Midori Hirose in 2 strands held double of Plötulopi by Istex. My last garment you have never seen on this channel. Here we are. We are just exposing it all. This is a design by Darling Jadore. This is the weekend sweater, and this is my second sweater I ever made. I'm trying to think. It is my second sweater. The very first sweater was a weekend sweater by Darling Jadore, but in a different yarn that is high up in a box right now. You can tell I don't wear this often because she's wrinkly and she's been in the bottom of my closet. So what I did with this sweater and why I'm choosing to share it with you is that the weekend sweater is a simple, at the time it wasn't simple, this was my second sweater, so it was like brain surgery. It's a one stitch raglan sweater with quite a bit of ease. It has it does have German short rows in it to raise the neckline, and that was a lot going on there already. I did not have my short rows down. I could not do a German short row to save my life. So these were in the days of figuring out wrap and turns. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And I decided to add a cable because, you know, why not as a brand new knitter? So I've added, to bring the cably goodness, it was a 2x2 cable. I had watched many different videos on how to cable. I actually used a cable needle for this. Everything else you've seen today and will see, there is no cable needle used. This there was, because again, from videos I saw, they're like, use a cable needle, this is how. You don't have to, and that's actually so much more manageable if you don't. And this is a very tight cable. We are learning how to knit. There are all kinds of flaws in this. I've kept it, I always will keep it. The yarn that I used was All Knitting for Olive, 1 strand of their Merino, and 1 strand of their soft silk mohair. Beautiful combination, but this sweater, like, there's mistakes. And, you know, we were learning how to do everything for the first time. This is like a hole that's happened with one of my increases for some reason. The short rows are creative. I'll show you. I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing, again, wrap and turns, and I just could not figure out how to do it. So I always got holes. Showing you on this side, I've tried to remedy it and give it a little, like, you know, stitching, making the holes disappear, which it didn't really work. I've worn it out before in public. It is a beautiful fabric. The sweater design is, to my memory from when I started knitting, fine. It was literally me learning techniques, but just showing that you can add cables to anything. And even as a new knitter, you can add simple cables. I would say if you are adding a simple cable, perhaps don't do the cable every other row because you are getting this crazy tight cable. Do a little bit more research, figure out how you can add a cable to something that you're interested in. I found this, you know, the cable allowed the sweater to become more unique. I don't know if anyone else has this exact, you know, weekend sweater by Darling Jadore with a 2x2 cable that has been rotated every two rows. I mean, that's pretty unique. But I'm feeling so happy that I have finally figured out the short rows. I feel really confident now. I do German short rows, and it took me years to figure out that technique. And so I feel thrilled. I feel really happy the way that I do so many things. I should say the necklines. I mean, I'm looking at this neckline and it's okay. I mean, again, I'm learning. I feel now I can do really simple versions of tacking down the neckline, where I remember doing this option and it was like you cast on like here, say it's really here, and you're doing your, this one's twisted rib, so you're twisting rib every other knit purl, and then instead of just bleeding into your sweater, you tack down your double knit button band, or sorry, double knit neckline with your needle as you're knitting. So you're knitting it down with your needles. For me, I find that it's a lot. And so what I actually do is I continue to knit. So it's almost like a mock neck, which is why a lot of the knits that you see that are whips are mock necks, so that later on, once I have the garment on and it's finished, I then have the choice of keeping it at the mock neck or tacking it down. And when I do tack down, I do like just a whip stitch to hold that neckline down. And it works well. I feel I enjoy that technique and it looks good. Anyway, so second sweater ever that I knit, the weekend sweater by Darling Jadore in Knitting for Olive, all Knitting for Olive. Those are my cable sweaters. I do have a matching, exactly this sweater that I knit my mother in blue. I don't think I have any footage or photos of it, but I will look. And hers is better because this was the first like prototype that I did. Hers does not, in my memory, have flaws, except the short rows would be probably hideous, but she's accepted it, and that's nice. That's lovely. I'm going to show you now accessories that I did, and I have two physical, and then I'm going to show photos of one other. I'm going to start with the Portia shawl. Portia shawl you saw last week, so I won't go on about it. This is a beautiful cable shawl design by Natasha Hornby. This I knit in, and I don't want to get it wrong, Portia, a Mule Spinner 2-ply by Custom Woolen Mills in natural light gray. I had 3 skeins. I made this into a much smaller shawl than the designer intended, and the cast off, or I should say border edge, I completely eliminated. I went through so many different trial and error to get something that would work with only 3 skeins because the original design was like 5. And I ended up going with a very simple I-cord, and I feel like it's effective, it's minimal, and it allows the shawl to be done in 3 skeins. So there we are. That is the Portia by Moonstruck Knits or Natasha Hornby. If you want to find out more information with more details, go to last week's video. And then my last knit object that I'm going to show you is the Tilda hat. I'm just going to bring this up. The Tilda hat is a design by Inese Knits. This is a free pattern and one that I featured in the gift knits from last December. This is again a free pattern, so it's a great little simple knit. It's a very high gauge. Yes, high gauge, low gauge. It's very thick yarn. Now I'm getting mixed up, sorry. And so it allows you to knit this quickly. Again, I was really inspired with like dark cables. So we have a very like moody hat going on. There's only 2 different motifs on here with the cables. You've got this braided one, if it's showing up, I'm not sure. And like, I don't know, I think it's like a 2x2 one here. Super simple. You knit it from brim to the crown. And yeah, it's just a simple little hat. I knit a number of these for gifts, so I only have one for myself. Everyone else, you know, every other Tilda hat that I knit, I gave away. Super approachable. This should have made it, this pattern, onto the beginner knits for last week's video, but I actually forgot about it. And being a free pattern, could have done a double whammy and could have gone for the free pattern option. It's something that I wear quite a bit, but I find for me it's a little short. I actually like having a bit of a peak or stiffness up here. This is in Camaro Snefnug, so it's a blown yarn, super crazy soft. And yeah, I picked it because I had a leftover and it doesn't itch my little forehead. Yeah, great as a little gift knit, great as a beginner knit, great as a palette cleanser, and you do not need a cable needle. The last thing I'm going to share, and I don't have with me, but I'm going to do a little photo in, is the Dainty Bubbles. These are mittens designed by T. Shep, free pattern as well. I knit these for my mom for her birthday last year with yarn that I purchased in Nova Scotia from the Chocolate River Yarns and Fibers yarn shop. Lovely yarn. It was a commission yarn. It's a 70% Romney and 30% Texel yarn. It's Nova Scotia raised, spun, and dyed yarn in blue, her favorite color, blue. And yeah, the cables are what I would call traveling cable. It's a great little pattern for that. But from my memory and just clicking on Ravelry quickly, I think it's only one size. It is a free pattern, so keep that in mind. And yeah, I'm just looking. Yeah, but the cables are beautiful because they weave into each other. Very doable, easy to follow. And yeah, that's the Dainty Bubbles mittens. I would suggest knitting it in something other than what I knitted in, only because what I knitted in was way too thick of a yarn weight for this. So I found with the cables, because you're crossing stitches over and knitting those, everything was like very tight on the needles, and this actually gave me some hand issues. So just letting you know, I would go with the Aran, and I know for a fact if I had the mittens in my possession and could measure, it must have been a bulky yarn that I used. So just keep that in mind. I think maybe applying that knowledge to all of your knitting for cables, if you are planning on knitting cables, being mindful of the yarn choice. We talked about that elasticity piece, but as well an appropriate yarn where your hands are going to be comfortable, because cables, when you are working those stitches, you're crossing them, so it's pulling the stitch further, making it tighter, and you would never want to damage your hands or elbow, like knitter's elbow, because you've done too much cables or haven't knit, I think, appropriately, or found appropriate yarn for cables. Right. So that's everything that I've knit with cables. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to me babble on about cables. I do hope that you have some inspiration of different maybe patterns that you didn't think of little like tips and tricks that I wove in into sharing about the cable knits that I've done. I love knitting cables, and again, you know, if I had a million hours every day of knitting, I would be knitting cables all the time, along with color work and stockinette, and I just love it. Don't let cables scare you. I know we have heard time and again, knitting is all just knits and purls. Absolutely true. Cables are just knitting those stitches out of order. That's it. I think as long as you are calm with yourself and give yourself the patience that you need, picking the right tools and patterns with yarn choice, you're going to be ready to rock. So don't be fearful. and get into cable knitting, I hope, or get back into it. If you have any questions or comments about anything I shared today, let me know. And if you enjoyed the content today, I very much invite you to join, subscribe here to the channel, like the episode. So thank you very much for that. If you're finding yourself even more, I invite you to click on the Ko-Fi link below and prepare a little donation for myself. That would be greatly appreciated. And of course, I have a little bit of news to share. Our test knitters are underway feverishly with knitting up my second design ever, which is the Bellwoods hat. I cannot wait to share about this pattern and the hat. I'm looking at a release for November the 8th. So there will be one video that will be coming out that will be super detailed about the hat and all the different versions that I've knit up and the different versions that have been knit up by our wonderful testers. Thank you to all of them. It's been so lovely. So yes, until then, we shall be knitting up a storm here in the Pairs Well Within Knitting household. I have a little trip that is going to be happening next weekend, which I'm thrilled about. So I'm hoping to shoot some footage while I'm at this destination with the love of my life. And yes, until then, I hope you find great joy in your knitting and great joy in your cable knitting. Take care, and until next time.